March 2024, a shell-cratered field outside Terny, eastern Ukraine. Two Russian engineering vehicles crawl toward a crippled tank sitting in no man's land, cables ready, engines straining. They've been ordered to steal it. Ukrainian drone crews watching the feed have other plans, and within minutes, their drones are hammering the recovery vehicles until the whole operation falls apart. Moscow risked men and machines in open ground for a single damaged tank. Not an Abrams, not a Challenger. A Swedish tank most people have never heard of. And the Russians wanted it badly enough to crawl under drone-filled skies to get it. The Stridsvagn 122 beat America's best tank in open competition, embarrassed the French, and survived 2 years of the most brutal armored warfare since 1945. This is the story of how the country famous for flat-pack furniture quietly built the finest Leopard on Earth, and why Britain's Challenger crews should be nervous about the comparison. Sweden has a national talent for understatement. The appropriate response to winning the lottery here is a quiet nod. Standing out is considered mildly suspicious, and the greatest cultural export since ABBA remains the ability to assemble a bookshelf without speaking to another human being. The understatement extends to national security, occasionally too far. Sweden's first ever national security advisor resigned after it emerged he'd left classified documents in a hotel safe after a conference. Papers eventually discovered by a hotel cleaner who, according to the police investigation, could be linked to violent extremist circles. The court later ruled him negligent, though not grossly negligent, which might be the most Swedish verdict ever delivered. Even the espionage scandals come with a polite qualifier. The politics got stranger. The Liberal Party spent years swearing it would never cooperate with the hard-right Sweden Democrats, roughly the way you'd swear off gas station sushi, then climbed into a governing agreement with them anyway when the math demanded it. Swedish principles are firm right up until the coalition calculator comes out. So no, this is not a country you'd expect to build the best tank in Europe, which is exactly why nobody noticed when it did. Rewind to the early 1990s. The Soviet Union has collapsed, and Sweden, neutral on paper, paranoid in practice, decides its aging tank fleet needs replacing. Instead of picking a favorite, Stockholm does something delightfully cold-blooded. It invites the West's 3 premier tanks to compete against each other on Swedish soil, in Swedish winter, under Swedish testing standards. The American M1 A2 Abrams shows up. So does the French Leclerc. Germany sends the Leopard 2. The trials were merciless. Each contender ground through thousands of test kilometers in snow and slush before facing live fire evaluation and a protection analysis conducted by engineers with no alliance loyalty and no reason to flatter anyone. When the dust settled in 1994, the improved Leopard configuration Sweden had demanded won the contract. The Abrams pride of the US Army went home beaten. The Leclerc went home beaten and French. America barely registered the result. Sweden wasn't a NATO member, the Cold War was over, and nobody in Washington lost sleep over a procurement decision in Stockholm. That indifference is why one of the most consequential tank verdicts of the decade slipped past the public completely. The Abrams lost a fair fight, and the world simply changed the channel. Winning the trial was Germany's achievement. What happened next was Sweden's. Stockholm refused to buy the Leopard 2A5 as offered. The engineers at FMV treated Germany's masterpiece as a rough draft. Extra composite armor went onto the turret front and hull until the protection profile exceeded anything Berlin fielded for itself. The roof received reinforcement against artillery airburst, a threat most designers of the era politely ignored. Swedish command and control systems wired the fleet into a shared battlefield picture years before network-centric warfare became a conference buzzword. The result entered service in 1997 as the Stridsvagn 122, a name that translates to battle wagon, because Swedish is a language that refuses to be dramatic about anything. The machine itself had no such modesty. At 62.5 tons, it carried a 120mm Rheinmetall smoothbore with 42 rounds, a 1,500 horsepower MTU diesel pushing it to 68 kilometers per hour, and a protection package that defense analysts rated the best of any Leopard 2 variant of its generation. Germany designed a Predator. Sweden gave it winter instincts and body armor. The production run itself was a two-country infantry operation. Krauss-Maffei-Wegmann built 29 of the hulls in Germany, while Hägglunds assembled the remaining 91 in Sweden. A work-share arrangement that quietly seeded the Swedish defense industry with deep Leopard expertise it still profits from today. Total output stopped at 120 vehicles, which kept the tank in the category of exquisite rarities, the kind of machine that appears in reference books with an asterisk and a sigh. Then Sweden nearly threw it all away. The post-Cold War peace dividend hit Stockholm harder than most capitals, and by the 2000s, the country that had just built Europe's finest Leopard was slashing its armored forces, while politicians debated whether tanks were obsolete. A machine engineered to stop a Soviet invasion spent years waiting for a war everyone had declared impossible. History delivered its rebuttal in February 2022, loudly in Ukrainian. Inside the vehicle, 4 crewmen work a layout refined for a very specific fight. Swedish armor doctrine never imagined grand desert charges. The plan was always ambush warfare at home. Tanks appearing out of tree lines, firing, then vanishing back into terrain that swallows thermal signatures and radio waves alike. Crews trained to fight half-frozen in small dispersed units that might not hear from higher command for days. Normal life in a country where winter darkness lasts longer than some marriages. The 42 rounds aboard weren't meant for a fair fight. The doctrine called for making every engagement an unfair one. On ground the defender had memorized since childhood. The war this tank eventually found was nothing like the one it trained for. It adapted anyway. For 25 years, the Strv-122's reputation rested on paper. It had never fired a shot in anger, and no enemy had ever tested the armor Sweden spent a decade perfecting. Then in 2023, Sweden donated 10 of them to Ukraine, and every one went to a single unit, the 21st Mechanized Brigade, defending the Kremina forest in the east. Ukrainian soldiers nicknamed it the Swedish Brigade, since most of its vehicles came from the same generous Scandinavian warehouse. The forest was a nightmare posting. Mines seeded every track, while Cornet missiles waited in the tree lines. And above it all, first-person view drones hunted anything with an engine. Within months, the Strv-122s started taking hits, and the story splits into 2 versions, depending on who's telling it. Russian media ran victory laps. After Lancet drones knocked out 2 of the tanks near Stelmakovka in September 2023, Kremlin-friendly outlets declared that the Swedish tanks were not so reliable after all, and that Ukraine had lost a 1/5 of its precious fleet in a single engagement. On the numbers, the pessimists had ammunition. Analysts at Oryx eventually documented that at least 7 of the 10 had been hit, damaged, or abandoned at various points around Terney, several left sitting in contested fields. Then the other version. When President Zelensky visited the brigade in October 2023, photographs showed one of the damaged tanks in the background, and the damage was largely cosmetic. The Swedish composite layers were doing exactly what they were designed to do, shrugging off drone strikes carrying a pound or 2 of explosive. Oryx, the same skeptical source Russia loves to cite, labeled just one Strv-122 as outright destroyed in that period. By early 2026, after 2 full years in the meat grinder, reporting confirmed the brigade still had most of its Strv-122s operational. Nearly every tank got hit. Nearly every tank kept fighting. Crews walked away from strikes that would have cooked a T-72 crew in seconds. And the difference isn't luck. It's the layered turret armor Stockholm insisted on 30 years before FPV drones existed. So back to that field outside Terney. Now you understand why Russia wanted that abandoned tank so desperately. Capturing a Strv-122 intact would hand Russian engineers the exact armor recipe of Europe's best protected Leopard. The same protection scheme feeding into NATO's next generation. The 21st Brigade understood the stakes too. Ukrainian drones swarmed the Russian recovery vehicles until the operation collapsed, and rival teams of engineers spent weeks dueling over damaged Strv-122s scattered through no man's land. each side risking lives over machines that couldn't even move. The brigade's tankers, meanwhile, evolved. They wrapped their remaining vehicles in custom anti-drone frames and porcupine screens. One crewman told Army TV that not a single tank in the battalion runs without them. A Swedish design upgraded by Ukrainian welders hunted by Russian drones. Nobody in Stockholm's design bureau saw that sentence coming. Survival created its own problem. A tank that refuses to die still needs repairs, and with only 120 ever manufactured, spare parts for the Strv-122 are rarer than a talkative Swede on public transport. Damaged vehicles faced long journeys to repair facilities as far away as Lithuania, and documented returns to service came slowly. At one point, analysts could visually confirm just 2 repaired tanks rejoining the fight. Sweden declined to send replacements from its own limited stock, since every hull mattered for home defense. The lesson cut deep in Stockholm. Boutique excellence wins duels, but wars are won by fleets you can actually fix. Time to make some enemies in the comments section. Britain's Challenger 2 entered service in 1998, 1 year after the Strv-122, and British tankers will tell you at length, possibly over warm beer, that it is the toughest tank ever built. The reputation is earned in one dimension: protection. Chobham-derived armor gave the Challenger a legendary survival record, and for 2 decades the British could claim no Challenger 2 had ever been destroyed by enemy fire. The Challenger's resume is genuinely longer. British crews took it through Iraq in 2003, where it shrugged off RPG ambushes in Basra and cemented a reputation for keeping its people alive, and Oman bought a tropical variant, making it the rare British export success that isn't a costume drama. The Strv-122 spent those same decades guarding forests nobody attacked. On combat experience, London held every card, until both tanks ended up in the same war. Ukraine complicated the legend. Both were donated in boutique numbers. Both fought in the same drone-saturated hellscape. And the Challenger's aura of invincibility ended on camera in 2023 when one burned near Robotime. War doesn't respect press releases. Put the 2 machines side by side and the Swedish case gets uncomfortable for London. The Strv-122's 1,500 horsepower outmuscles the Challenger's 1,200, translating to 68 kilometers per hour against 59. In a war where drones punish anything slow, that gap is measured in survival. The gun argument is worse. The Challenger 2 fires a 120mm rifled gun, a proud British eccentricity that uses 2-piece ammunition no longer in production anywhere. The Strv-122's smoothbore feeds from the same NATO ammunition ecosystem as every Leopard and Abrams on the continent, with modern rounds still rolling off production lines. One tank shops at the world's largest ammunition supermarket. The other inherited Granddad's rifle and a finite box of shells. Where the Challenger genuinely competes is raw protection and combat pedigree. With added modules, it climbs past 70 tons of armor, and its Gulf War-era lineage includes engagements the Strv-122 never faced. Call the comparison honest. Britain built a fortress, Sweden built an athlete in a fortress's armor. In 2026, against drones and missiles rather than other tanks, the athlete is aging better. Sweden watched every hit its donated tanks absorbed, and the response tells you everything about how seriously Stockholm took the lesson. The 110 Strv-122s remaining at home are being rebuilt to a new standard called Strv-123A, gaining a longer L55A1 main gun along with new sights and electronics, plus an auxiliary power unit, so the tank can watch the battlefield without running its main engine like a fuel-drunk lumberjack. On top of the rebuilds, Sweden ordered 44 brand new Strv-123Bs based on Germany's latest Leopard 2A8. The delivery math lands at 154 modern tanks by 2031. Everyone carrying design lessons paid for in Ukrainian fields. The tank that beat the Abrams in 1994 is getting a second act, and this time the world is watching from the start. 30 years ago, Sweden ran the fairest tank competition ever staged and quietly crowned a champion nobody celebrated. The champion then spent 2 years in Europe's bloodiest war in generations, proving the judges right, one absorbed drone strike at a time. Somewhere in Moscow, an intelligence officer is still filling out papers paperwork explaining why the recovery mission failed. The Swedes won't gloat about any of it. Gloating would be unseemly. They'll just build 154 better ones and let the silence do the talking, the way it always has. If a Swedish battle wagon outsurviving half the armored vehicles in Ukraine earned your 13 minutes, the subscribe button is down there. Press it once, no assembly instructions required. See you at the next front line.